All right, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Chelsea Egenberger, and I am the program representative for the Public Works projects on the CDBG team. So glad you could join us today. And this is our Q2 CDBG Connect. That's CDBG payment requests, everything you need to know to process a payment request. Please note that these slides are going to be presented or available on our CDBG website after today's presentation, as well as the recording of today's webinar. All right, so quickly wanted to just run down who is the audience for our CDBG Connects. So these CDBG Connect webinars do provide that ongoing training and technical assistance to individuals who are working with the Nebraska Department of Economic Development CDBG program. These webinars are a great opportunity for certified administrators, community leaders, and potential applicants, as well as CDBG stakeholders to dive deeper into specific CDBG topics. So today we will cover payment request requirements, how to submit a payment request in UNA, tracking project expenses, and common payment request issues. So we will address all our questions at the end of today's presentation. So feel free to put those in the chat or use the Q&A function. We do request that you keep your mic on mute throughout the presentation, and if we need to, we can unmute you at the end during our question and answer session. And again, at the end of our presentation today, we will have an evaluation form for you that will allow you to provide us feedback on today's session and give us suggestions for future CDBG Connect webinars. As a reminder, the recording and slides will be available after today's presentation. All right, I'm going to pass it off to Nicole to tell us more about uniform guidance changes.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Bartles. I'm the CDBG program manager. And so I'm going to just touch on why did we decide on this topic? Well, we have had a lot of questions recently about what are the new changes or why are there new changes in place regarding payment requests. And it all stems from the uniform guidance that was updated and went into effect on October 1st of 2024. There are quite a few changes that were made during those particular published date. And so we really highly recommend that you visit. We have a key revision amendment that was added to our 2025 CDBG manual on our website that highlights quite a few of the different changes. For example, one of the highlights was the financial management. They've really keyed in on making sure that you have an established internal control. If you're dealing with federal dollars, meaning that we want to make sure that we know who is recording the invoices, who's paying it, the process that you go through to actually process a payment. And so that's just one example of the many different things that were highlighted there. A lot of our 2025 in our 2025 manual does make a reference to a lot of the updates that were from that uniform guidance. Additionally, in our 2024 agreement for CDBG, we do reference that CDBG is a reimbursement program, meaning that payment should be paid to the contractor or the professional service agreement, and then you submit your payment for a reimbursement process. Meaning also that you have to required to have that source documentation, which Chelsea will talk about here later. It's really important that we follow that. Now, there is a process, which I'll touch on here shortly, of what that looks like if you do not have the funds available in the account at the time. But at this time, CDBG is a reimbursement program, and that is again referenced in our agreements from our 2024 and 2025 agreement. As mentioned, we do allow, if the community does not have the sufficient funds available to pay at that time, but you might not have it in your account, we do offer a waiver, meaning that, and it's kind of misleading because it does say that it's an advance or direct payment. That's within the program guidelines. Within our grant management system, we do not offer an advancement. There are other DED programs that do offer that. The difference there is that for such as our state program of our civic financing program, we offer half of the funds up front before the project even gets started as an advancement, and then they request for the payment afterwards. CDBG is not like that. Again, we are a reimbursement program, and so if you do not have the funds on hand to pay those invoices at that time, you can submit a waiver, meaning that you then have a 30-day time limit to provide us those documents that Chelsea will touch on, such as your check, your approval that you've paid those invoices with that current contractor. Again, and that's done through a waiver process to make sure that we're following the federal rules and uniform guidance.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate that. And now we'll dive deeper into payment requests specifically. So we'll be talking more about the requirements that'll go along with each payment request. So on this slide are all the documents that are either needed to be on file or submitted with your payment request. So on the following slides, we will review each of these further in depth. First up, we have one of our special conditions, the W-9 and ACH form. So as part of the special conditions for release of CDBG funds, subrecipients must submit the state of Nebraska W-9 and ACH form in UNA. To access this template, you would log into UNA, select that custom tab at the top, and then select the state of Nebraska W-9 ACH form. That's part of the screenshot you can see here in the middle of the screen. This will take you then to that web page with the link of the template. There is additional documentation that we will need to go along with that. So the additional documentation verifying the account information needs to be uploaded along with the completed W-9 and ACH form, which could either be a canceled check or a bank document that includes the account owner information, the routing and account number. And please do be sure to verify those numbers match before submitting them. On this slide, this just shows you some of the example of the W-9 and ACH form, that verification document, which is a process check, and then some of the details and screenshots of where you would go to in UNA, in our grant management system, to go ahead and upload that form and be sure to include that form of verification. All right, our other special condition document that is required as a part of the payment request process is the authorization to request funds form. This form identifies the individuals who are authorized to request the CDBG funds. And this typically are individuals like the mayor or board chairperson and a city clerk or a city administrator or an executive director. So some considerations, please be sure that the authorized individuals follow the local internal control policy for accounts receivable and accounts payable. This document really should contain those original signatures and keep that document on file. Please keep this form current and up to date. So if there's a change in an official or a change in the clerk, make sure that these get updated along with that subrecipient information in the UNA grant file. And then, as I mentioned here, again, UNA is the kind of the grant management system where all formal documents for our grants need to be. And so that form should be uploaded using the UNA special condition form. I also want to note here that requests for funds in the drawdown form require those original signatures of both the individuals identified on this form, not just one. So on this slide, it's just some screenshots for what you can expect to find on our website. The CDBG resource library is where you can find the template with that authorization to request funds. That can be applied then using your municipality letterhead. And then again, a screenshot here of the UNA grant management system and the special condition form where that will be uploaded. All right. Another document that is required to be on file for payment request processing includes any service agreements for expenses to be funded. For example, if a payment request includes an invoice for general administration services and engineering services, both the general administration and engineering service agreements must be on file. So please note that this the service agreement for general administration services cannot be executed prior to the notice of approval of the project award. And in addition to the subrecipient agreement, DED must receive documentation that the agreement was authorized by the local board through meeting minutes and that the service provider was verified in sam.gov. Here is the screen showing you what documents are required for the professional service agreements and where it would get uploaded in the UNA grant management system. All right, for each payment request, the request for funds form must be completed and signed. The template is available on the CDBG resource library on the DED website. We will review this form a bit more in depth later in this presentation. However, please note that the full instructions for how to complete this form are detailed on page 2 of the template. With each payment request, the source documentation must be submitted that contains vital details about the transaction. That would be things such as the name of the parties involved, current and paid amounts, the service dates, and the substance of the transaction. All project cost documentation need to provide enough detail to show that the costs are eligible and match the scope of services in the subrecipient agreement. On this slide, we also call out the specific CFR that lists out the eligible expenses. So just note here that the cost must be necessary, allowable, reasonable, and capable of being allocated following those federal regulations and the CDBG contract. So for us to be able to understand if those costs are necessary, allowable, reasonable, and capable, we do need to see those detailed service dates and descriptions. And then the other thing that we, of course, are checking are the expenses that match the scope of services in that professional service agreement. All right. So some other source documentation requirements include for general administration, we need to make sure that it follows the 24 CFR Part 570.206A. So for that, we need to really see that the costs that are being applied to general administration are in nature to support, in direct support of the project. Excuse me, let me start that over. Costs that are administrative in nature, but are in direct support of a project activity. So say in support of a street improvement activity, that should be charged to the project activity or street improvements and not to general administration. So again, example could include costs that are associated with maybe procurement of an advertisement or obtaining a permit would be more for the project activity and not for general administration. So for construction management, any invoice under construction management that contains some service hours to complete wage interviews, please submit the record of employee interview forms that correspond with the invoice service. So those wage interviews provide a checkpoint in real time during the project construction phase that allows us to address any pay issues and wage determinations right away. And then last here are in-house expenses. So those, of course, have to follow the CFR 200.40G. So if you are a project that are using, say, for example, a city engineer to work on the project, or perhaps our city administrator that's doing some of the general administration services, please be sure to follow that CFR and know that we do need invoices and source documents that show the detail of the work being completed. I would really recommend that if that is true for your particular project, that you reach out to your program representative, and they will be happy to support you in ensuring that you are setting up your tracking of your hours to meet DED requirements. All right, here are some common types of source documents that we would see that are submitted along with a payment request. So first up is an invoice. So here we should see the merchant's name, the invoice date, the amount being billed. Again, really need that detailed description of any of the items being billed for, and a description of any additional charges as well. So taxes or service delivery, things like that. Another thing I want to note here is if labor is going to go on the same invoice as materials and supplies, be sure that those are separated. Here is another common type of source document that gets submitted with payment requests to be an application and certificate of payment. So be sure with these documents that all of the required signatures are executed on the document. And this should also include a broken out expenses or invoice. So on the following slide, you can kind of see some examples of those broken out different activities being done under that pay app. And last, we also have itemized receipts. So similar to an invoice, we really need to see those merchant name, the invoice date, the amount billed, detailed description of the items, and any additional charges. I do want to mention that the form of payment would also be required. So that's credit card, check, etc. All right. So other payment request requirements include the proof of payment. The proof of payment does provide documentation of reimbursement requirement and needs to be provided with each payment request. So proof of payment documentation could be provided in the form of a process check, confirmation of credit debit payment, or confirmation of a wire or automated clearinghouse transfer. Only one form of proof of payment is required to be submitted to DED. Do want to note that for downtown revitalization, only proof of payment for submitted expenses are needed. So individual payments from the community to businesses for downtown revitalization projects are not required. Common types of proof of payments include cleared or canceled checks. So please submit the photocopy of a cleared or canceled check that includes the front and back. And this should contain the check number, the date the check is issued, the bank name and address, payee name, payer name, amount on the check, and this should be matching invoice unless additional documentation for tracking is shown, and then the clearance date. Usually a time and date of processing is found on the back of the check. Another form of proof of payment documentation could be financial system statements. So this shows the evidence of the funds that were transferred through the invoice and supporting documentation. So do want to note that credit payments need proof that the agency paid the expense against the credit card balance. And please do highlight the transactions on the statement that is submitted. That helps in speeding up the process of our review. And one of the other payment requirements that is needed is local approval. So documents that the approval process set forth by the local authorizing board and subrecipient's internal control structure in accordance with that 2 CFR 200, 302, and 303. So each payment request should include this form of documentation. And a lot of times the common types of source documents are approved board or council meeting minutes, or perhaps a treasurer's report that contains authorized payments, along with that documentation of the board and council approval of the treasurer report. If there are other forms of documentation that your community uses that it shows that approval from the local unit of government, please submit that to us in advance, and we'd be happy to review it to ensure it meets our requirements. And here are some of those examples of the local approval. Again, it really helps to have the items highlighted in the document for where that approval is. So there's a few different meeting document certification from the city clerk and a treasurer report. All right, so we've covered what are the items needed required to either be submitted at the time of a payment request or to have on file for us to be able to process that. And now we're going to cover how to submit a payment request in UNA, our grant management system. So first, you're going to gather all those required documents that we talked about. So make sure that any of the reference documents are already uploaded into UNA. So make sure those professional service agreements and the supporting documents are there. And then for each of the payment requests, we need to see that request for funds form, the source documentation, the proof of payment, and local approval. Then you're going to complete your request for funds form. And this is the form that's going to be signed then by those individuals who are on the authorization to request funds document on file. And then you'll create the payment request in UNA and upload all the relevant documents there. So you want to mention to ensure that the UNA payment request form numbers match what's on the request for funds form. So here are some best practice guidelines for submitting payment requests. So submitting payment requests to DED should happen on a regular basis. This definitely needs to happen every 180 days, as you can see later here on the slide, but quarterly or monthly, some kind of regular process for when this is being submitted. It really helps ensure that we're not going too long without processing payment and addressing some of the project's progress. So the minimums that are best practice for submission are going to be $500 for a general admission, or general administration expenditures. And then it'll be $1,500 for other payment requests that would be either a combination of project activities like general administration, construction management, or it would be a minimum of $1,500 also for any project activity like street improvement or sidewalks. So there are some exceptions. That is, of course, the final request may be less than these minimums. We definitely want to see activity on every project activity needs to be drawn down every 180 days. And then any other requests initiated by DED. So if we reach out to you and we need to see a drawdown perhaps on construction management because it's been over 180 days, it would not be required to meet the minimum. So completing the request for funds form. This is an example of the request for funds form, and it really has 4 sections to it. Again, I want to highlight that the full directions for this form, which is a complex form, are on the second page of the template. So I would encourage you to spend some time looking at that further, but we are, of course, always available as program reps to answer your questions. So the 4 different sections include the project information. So there at the top of the form, you'll see that some of the just specifics about that project, including the UEI number, the SAM expiration date, and which number of payment requests this is. Please be sure to make sure if it is the final drawdown to indicate that on here as well. Part 1 is the status of funds. So this lists out the project's funding status, so those approved and already spent funds. Part 2 is going to be listing out the payment request amounts. So, and you'll be sure to list that out to the pennies or the cents column. We need to see those specific numbers to keep the project accounting on track. So there you'll list out all the total cash requirements to date in that first row, and you would take out the local funds that would be in that second row, and then you would be identifying which funds for this payment request are going to be part of the full total requested amount. So at the bottom, you will need to also make sure that it is authorized. This is where the individuals who are on the authorized to request funds form are sign the form, and that a copy of that gets uploaded into UNA. So when you go into UNA, it'll give you an opportunity to create a payment request form. So this is a screenshot of how it looks after it's been submitted. And here are a few things that we wanted to make sure to highlight. Always select reimbursement type. Even if you are approved for that, direct payment waiver, you're always going to utilize the reimbursement type. And then always make sure that you're entering the local match as an amount and not a percentage. We've seen some payment requests get a little messed up in our numbers in the accounting when a percentage is used instead of amount. And then please do verify that all the numbers match. Match your request for funds form, match your project accounting spreadsheet overall. Make sure that everything looks good before you officially submit it. Here's some screenshots that break down further what these, the different form, the payment request form looks like on UNA. So each section, you will go ahead and enter that key information. So organization and grant info, the payment request information. And when you get down into the financial details section, here, about 3/4 of the way down, this is where you'll actually enter each line item. So the examples here, we can see sidewalks. It should open a new box for you that allows you to enter in, if there was multiple invoices for sidewalks, you could enter each one of those as a line item. And then you will also be sure to include your attachment. So here is the example of the attachment of the invoice. And you'll also type in how much was the direct cost, the cash match, if there was in-kind or any other funding, and then it also lists the grant funded remaining. So after you enter each one of your project activity expenses for the payment request, it'll total up everything in the financial detail portion. So you can see the total amount expense, the total amount of cash match that you're applying, and then it'll also over here show the grant funded amount. And that ultimately becomes the requested amount in UNA. Please be sure to check that requested amount. It does match your request for funds form. It is easy to get off in typing in these numbers and just to get a few cents off. So just encourage you to double check that, make sure that all of the numbers are matching before you get it submitted. So, before I move on, I also want to call out the additional information portion of this webpage. That is where you can upload the additional documents that are required for the payment request. So that includes the request for funds form that is signed, the local approval, and the proof of payment. This is also where you could attach the approved direct payment waiver if your project has one of those. This webpage is the UNA Resource DED Grants Help Center. And when we provide the slides, a lot of these slides have specific links. So be sure to look at those slides and know that when you access the PDF, you'll be able to click on these specific links that will take you directly to the Help Center, where they talk about how to create expenses and review them in UNA, how to complete the payment request funds report, and the payment request source documentation tracker. That is how you would submit additional source documentation if the payment request was already approved and you were submitting it post-approval. So I just wanted to call out, please go to the Help Center to see more specifics about how to do UNA processes step by step. If there is something you run into with this that is not up to date or isn't working as it should, please reach out to us. Sometimes things do get updated in UNA, but don't always get updated here. And we will make sure that we can work with our data and technology team to get that updated so that it is a useful resource for you all. And the last thing here about how to submit a payment request we wanted to mention is, how are these drawdowns processed at DED? So this flow chart just kind of shows the steps here at DED. First, we as a program representative would review and approve the payment request. Then it goes to our finance team, which has a few different steps of verification and authorization. Then it goes to Nebraska Finance before the funds are then transferred to the recipient. So overall, this can take about 10 to 14 business days. And I do want to note that each drawdown is reviewed for its completeness. So if the program representative notices an issue, we will reach out to you with any questions so that we can address that before it moves on in the process. All right. So a key part of submitting a successful payment request is keeping good accounting records. So now we will explore some best practices in tracking those project expenses. First, we want to talk about setting up a management system. So that management system is really crucial for identifying who are going to be the person or the people responsible for navigating the project finances. You want to establish those accounting records and set up a bank accounts or establishing receipting procedures that may not already be established. You want to make sure that you have a payment schedule for when you will be getting invoices reviewed and submitted on a regular basis, and make sure that you have your approval procedures in place. And then the system should really be evaluated and reviewed on a regular basis and during that risk analysis or during monitoring visits. So this is all part of this CDBG financial management certification that is part of what is the special conditions process is signing off that such a financial management system is in place. So be sure to take a look at that to know what your municipality is responsible for. And if you have any questions, of course, we are here to help answer those. So this management system is going to serve three basic functions. So first, it must record all the financial transactions. It is helping us make sure that all the activities are related to the activities in the proposed application and approved through the notification of approval and the CDBG contract. And then all expenditures made in accordance with applicable laws and rules and regulations. So again, all of this is being governed by the CDBG regulations and that 24 CFR 570, the Super Circular up to CFR 200, and the DED requirements. So when it comes to tracking project expenses, your project accounting spreadsheet is really going to be your home for all the most important information when it comes to your budget. So use this subrecipient agreement, the budget in that subrecipient agreement to help set this up. The budget amendment, create that or utilize that to create your spreadsheet and identifying all of the different activities and the funding amounts. When you're setting that up, applying the local match is really important. Best practice is to make sure that that match is being applied to proportionally across all of the project activities, all the applicable project activities. So that helps make sure that the community does not undermatch when it comes closer to the end of the project. And the local match does not apply to general administration and construction management expenses. So please utilize also some UNA reports to check your numbers. I know that you can go into your project account and you can take a look at your budget, but we want to highlight here that there's also a reports tab that will allow you to check not only your budget variance report, but also will provide a detailed report of your payment requests. So in UNA, if you go to the reports and then post award, you'll find those specific reports to get that information. These are just some screenshots of a few different examples of project accounting spreadsheets. So do you want to call out that this is really where you're going to be not only keeping all of the foundational information about your project budget, but is where you're keeping track of those payment details. You're going to be listing out each of the expenses and activities per line item. And this spreadsheet should allow you to compare the actual budget versus the budget, budgeted budget, the actual accounts versus the budgeted account. And then payment request numbers. Make sure that you're tracking which expenses were submitted with which payment request. And then make sure that you're looking at that applied match and make sure that you're utilizing the percentage and meeting that on an ongoing basis with your payment requests. If you wanted to set up a different way of meeting your match, please talk to your program representative. That would be the best way to figure out a different payment schedule. I do want to note that it is not required to provide this project accounting spreadsheet with your payment request. However, providing it may really speed up the processing, and it allows us to see if both our accounting matches what you all have as well. All right, we now want to touch on some common payment request issues that we see. So one of the common things that we see is just missing documentation, whether that's a source documentation or some of that supplemental documentation. A lot of times we're maybe missing that local approval, the proof of payment, or possibly wage interviews. And then the professional service agreements may not be on file, or along with that, the expired sam.gov or applicable change orders. Some other issues could be discrepancy in invoicing, such as the service description doesn't match what's in the service agreement, scope of services, or perhaps it doesn't match what we have in our subrecipient agreement. Services provided outside of the type of performance would also be an issue, or any services that were before the notice of approval or release of funds as applicable. And then sometimes we're just missing some key information, such as the dates or a description of work. In those situations, program representatives will reach out and see if we can get the information filled in, and so we can continue to get that approved as soon as possible. And then discrepancy between numbers. That could happen between what's entered in UNA, what's on the request for funds form, or what's in the source documentation. And then, as we noted before, project activities really should be drawn down on every 6 months. So we may need to reach out to request a drawdown if we haven't received one. All right. On this slide, I wanted to provide some kind of quick links that will allow you to access some of these resources that will be helpful as you're navigating payment requests. So our current CDBG administration manual, the CDBG companion guide. We also have the webinar that was the companion guide where we discussed and reviewed that. The DED Grants Help Center, I have that on here as well. Again, that's going to be your guides to UNA. And I have linked here specifically the reimbursement payment requests and recipient reports. And then here are links to the Code of Federal Regulations, so the CFR that really dictates what we are responsible for as a state in overseeing the CDBG dollars. And as Nicole mentioned earlier, the 2025 CDBG manual does have an addendum to the key revisions in the 2 CFR 200. So be sure that when you get the slides, check that out. Otherwise, if you go now to our website and access the 2025 CDBG manual, you will see that addendum there. And then, of course, your program representative. We're always here to help answer questions, to help navigate issues that might be specific to your community. So really want to encourage you all to reach out to us. And I will have our contact information on the following slide. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole now, talk about OMB open comment.
Thanks, Chelsea. I did drop the link to the key revisions to addendum. I'm sorry, the first link was an error, but I reposted it, so hopefully you guys found that link helpful. I did want to make mention in this presentation, as I mentioned earlier, this at the beginning of the presentation, the OMB, or the Office of Management and Budget, did have an update in October of 2024. Right now, there is a current open public comment period that will end on July 13th. I dropped the link in the chat. If you want to read it, it's over 400 pages, but there are a lot of proposed rule changes to not just HUD, all federal programs. It's quite the list of that you can read through. But if you would like to provide public comment, they are accepting it. So there is a link at the bottom of this of the screen that says submit a public comment. I think it's highlighted in green. So if you have any suggestions on how to any comments regarding those federal changes, I would encourage that. OMB is proposing these revisions that would improve transparency, accountability, and oversight of federal awards across the federal government. Again, I mentioned this is not just HUD, it's over all of federal programming. This includes ensuring that the American tax dollars are not wasted or misused. Activities performed under federal awards are consistent with law and policy, and recipients are held accountable when they fail to meet these relevant standards. So just wanted to mention this in our presentation today, and I will pass it back over to Chelsea.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate that. Before we move on to questions and providing our contact information, I wanted to provide the CDBG Connect evaluation form. So you can utilize the QR code to scan now, or the link here, which will be available again in the slides. It will allow you to complete that evaluation, provide us some anonymous feedback, and also provide us some suggestions on future CDBG Connect topics. I'll leave it up here for a moment before we move into questions. And I do want to take a moment to do a quick plug for our Certified Administrator training, which will be happening in late September. So the dates for that are September 28th, 29th, and 30th, and October 1st, which contains some optional topics on the October 1st date. So this will be in Lincoln, and registration details will be sent out via our listservs as soon as that is available. So if you are not signed up to receive our CDBG updates, I do have a QR code on this slide that allows you to get signed up for DED mailing lists. And if you sign up for CDBG updates, you will be sure to get that notification of our Certified Administrator training this fall. All right, I will now turn it to questions, and maybe my colleagues can help highlight anything that hasn't been addressed.
This is Gina. I just want to point out that I told Chelsea incorrectly that CDBG training is September 29th, 30th, and October 1st, with optional sessions available on October 2nd. So again, it'll be the 29th, 30th of September and the 1st of November, with optional sessions on the 2nd of October. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. I appreciate that correction. I should have double checked. But do look for that email. Don't believe I see anything in the chat that looks like a question. I didn't see anything in Q&A. Of course, leave it open for a few minutes, make sure we don't miss any questions. Thank you, Nicole, for providing those links in the chat. I see a question in the chat. Cancel check or bank statement is needed, not both. That is correct. One form of proof of payment is required. So either a canceled check or a bank statement showing the funds had been distributed in alignment with the payment request. That would be sufficient. And I know someone's indicated they're working on typing up their question. And
I just wanted to say if you have a question that's more specific to a project, again, I think Chelsea's mentioned this, but you can definitely reach out to a program rep.
all right, well, got a few now in the chat. Once a payment request, a reimbursement request has been submitted, what is the typical review time? That's a great question. And I know it could kind of vary on what the program representative's workload looks like. But speaking for myself, I'm typically able to review them within receiving them within 48 hours. And of course, during the business days. Any other comments on that from my colleagues?
Agreed. Yeah, usually we typically try to get to them within 48 hours. I think we mentioned it before, but in the month of June, it's a little bit delayed because of our end of fiscal year for the state of Nebraska. So we did have a hard deadline of June 5th is what the finance department gave us. And so if you had any recent submissions, those will hopefully be processed starting tomorrow after the state finance team gives us the green light to go.
Thank you, Nicole. I did forget my note on, every year, with the fiscal year end date approaching, there is kind of a limbo time where there's some lag in processing. So thank you for mentioning that. And yes, we always get that notification out to you all as soon as possible when we know what that cutoff date is. I do see that we got the additional question of, when needing board approval for payment, does the claim need to be in its own motion or can it be a general motion? For example, the board members are presented a monthly claims list. They make a motion to approve payment as presented. Will this suffice to show payment approval? Yes, the only thing that we will need in addition to that is then that list of claims. We do need to see the specific payment that is in relation to the payment request, CDBG payment request, as a part of the list. But it's fine if that motion is part of a general motion. Nicole, any clarification or comment on that?
Nope. Just again, it's really gonna reference that your internal control. So, you know, if that's how your internal control is, and then we'll just follow that.
Great questions. Thank you, everyone. Given another few moments in case we have some more questions rolling in. And yeah, as Nicole mentioned, happy to answer any specific questions outside of here as well.
Chelsea, while we're waiting for questions, if you want to go to the next slide, and for those that want to jump off early, if you wouldn't mind doing our evaluation, that we'd much appreciate.
Yes, and then one more time, here is that evaluation form. We will get this link also shared out with you all post webinar today. But we welcome your feedback while it's fresh. Thanks everyone for your time and hopping on. Thanks for your patience as I stumbled over some words and did my best to describe some complex things. So appreciate y'all working on these payment requests and helping keep our project accounting on track. We do important work to make these projects come to life, and we really appreciate the collaboration that it takes. We have a few other questions. When is the next presentation and the topic? I do not believe we have our topic selected yet, so your feedback is certainly welcome in that area via the evaluation form. Unless there's further information you have, Nicole, that you want to share?
No, I mean, we have a couple topics of interest, but we haven't chosen one yet. And we do these quarterly, so it'll be a couple months yet, but we will send out a listserv update of when our next one is.
Thank you. And then got a question on construction management. So for construction management, just worker interviews are required, not certified payrolls. What if you have completed all the worker interviews but are reviewing payrolls? So yeah, I know for now we are just looking at the record of employee interview as a touch point for the work being done. Part of that is the certified administrator typically is doing the payroll review on the lower portion of that form. And so submitting a completed form that has both sections filled out is ideal. But payrolls are typically not reviewed until the benchmark 3 monitoring. And if there's further, I guess, comments or clarification you want to provide, Nicole, I would just welcome anything else.
Yep, no, that's exactly right. So that employee interview has that bottom portion of payroll review. So we will look at that just to make sure that you're on track for the correct wage determination, and that hopefully we can try to catch before there's any restitution needed for a project. And so we just want to make sure that the project is like I say, on track and going smoothly.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, we will keep it open for another minute or so just to see if there's any final questions. But appreciate your time today, everyone. All right. We're going to call that for today, but thank you again for joining today's webinar on payment requests, everyone's favorite topic. Stay tuned for our announcement on the next CDBG Connect webinar and the Certified Administrator training this fall. If you have any further questions or comments, please do reach out to your program representative or anyone on the CDBG team. Thank you for all you do and have a great rest of your afternoon.